You hear it before you see it. The screaming cuts through stone like a blade through bone. Sharp, wet, primal. You're standing outside a chamber in 1348, and the woman inside is dying. You don't know her name. You never will. But you hear her body tearing itself apart, and the sound crawls into your skull and stays there. This is not a hospital. This is not sterile. This is a room thick with the stench of sweat and blood and something darker, something that smells like the inside of a wound left open too long. The midwives are praying. The candles flicker, and she screams again. You want to look away, but you can't. Because this is not rare. This is not unusual. This is simply what it meant to be a woman. To carry life inside you, knowing it might be the thing that kills you. Pregnancy was not a miracle. It was a lottery, and the house always won. Sartre said hell is other people. But what if hell is their silence? What if hell is a world that hears you dying and calls it God's will? The door is locked. The screaming continues. And you realize you are not outside this nightmare. You are about to step inside it. The door opens, and the smell hits you like a fist. Copper, sweat, something rotten beneath it all. Decay dressed up as devotion. The floor is covered in straw, but the straw is no longer golden. It's dark, wet, soaked through with fluids you don't want to name. The candles flicker, casting shadows that twist and writhe across the walls like something alive, something hungry. In the corner, a priest clutches his cross, not in faith, in fear. His knuckles are white. His lips move in prayer, but his eyes say what his mouth won't. This is a losing battle. The midwife kneels beside the woman. Her apron stained so many shades of red it looks like a map of previous deaths. She whispers something. Encouragement, maybe. Or a lie. Because everyone in this room knows the truth. They just won't say it. This is not a birth. This is a ritual sacrifice dressed in the language of miracles. The herbs burning in the brazier do nothing. The prayers do nothing. The hope in the midwife's voice does nothing. But they perform anyway. Because what else is there? To admit the truth would be to admit that women have been dying this way for centuries. Not because God willed it, but because no one cared enough to stop it. The woman on the bed screams again, and this time you see her face. She is young, maybe 20, maybe younger. It doesn't matter. Her body has already decided her fate. Her belly is swollen, grotesque, a monument to something the world calls holy, but treats like a curse. Beneath the skin, something moves, not gently, not with love. It shifts and presses against her ribs like a prisoner testing the bars of a cage. And in a way, that's exactly what this is. A cage. Her pelvis. Too narrow, they'll say later. As if it were her fault. As if her bones chose to betray her. The medieval mind saw women's bodies as inherently broken, cursed by Eve, designed to suffer. The womb was not a cradle. It was a tomb waiting to close. The fetus was not a child. It was an invader, something that fed on her blood and carved its way out through her flesh. They didn't understand anatomy. They understood punishment. And so she lies there, her body no longer her own, hijacked by biology and mythology in equal measure. Her screams are not just pain, they are protest, a rebellion her body wages against itself. But there is no escape, no mercy. Only the slow, grinding certainty that she will tear apart from the inside out. What does it mean to be sentenced to death by your own flesh? To carry life and know It is the blade pressed against your throat. She is not alone in this. She never was. 1 in 3. Let that sit in your chest for a moment. Let it become real. If you knew 3 pregnant women in 1348, one of them would die. Not might. Would. In a village of 100 women, 30 bodies, 30 pools of blood soaking into straw, 30 children born into a world that had just swallowed their mothers whole. In a city, thousands. Across Europe, millions. This wasn't war, this wasn't plague, though plague would come soon enough. This was simply the cost of being female. The price of biology in a world that refused to understand it. 1 in 3. Say it again. Let the weight of it crush you, because it should. Because this wasn't natural. This wasn't God's plan. This was murder by ignorance, genocide dressed in the language of divine will. 30 women in a village. 30 futures erased. 30 voices silenced before they could even scream their last. And the world called it inevitable. The priests called it punishment. The midwives called it fate. But it wasn't fate. It was failure. A civilization that built cathedrals and wrote philosophy and waged wars for glory, but couldn't keep women alive long enough to hold their own children. Who were these women? And why did no one save them? They had names. The baker's daughter. Marjorie, maybe. Or Agnes. It doesn't matter now, does it? Married at 15. Pregnant at 16. Dead at 17. She never learned to read, but she knew the feel of dough beneath her hands, the smell of bread rising in the dark hours before dawn. She died before she could teach her daughter the same. The noblewoman in the castle, Lady Catherine, born into silk and privilege. She survived 4 births. 4 times, she walked through the valley of shadows and returned. The 5th time, she didn't. Money couldn't save her. Title couldn't save her. The midwives were the best in the region, and still, she bled until there was nothing left to bleed. The peasant mother in the frozen barn, 6 children already, 6 mouths to feed, and this 7th would be her last. She whispered something to the midwife as the light left her eyes. A name, maybe. A prayer. Or just the sound of surrender. Rich or poor. Noble or nameless. The birthing bed didn't care. It swallowed them all with the same indifference. Death was the only true democracy in the Middle Ages. The one place where a queen and a beggar could meet as equals, both hemorrhaging into straw, both abandoned by a world that needed them to breed, but refused to keep them alive. But what killed them, exactly? What was the blade that cut through so many lives? Hemorrhage. The blood comes fast, faster than anyone expects. One moment there's control. The next, there's a river. Red pooling beneath her, soaking through straw, through wood, through stone. Her heart races, trying to keep up, trying to pump what's no longer there. In minutes, she's pale. In minutes more, she's gone. Drained like a slaughtered animal, still conscious enough to know she's dying, but too weak to fight it. Obstructed labor. The baby won't come. Can't come. Stuck in the birth canal for hours, then days. The contractions become torture. Her body trying to expel what it cannot move. Exhaustion sets in. Dehydration. Desperation. The midwives pull. They push. They pray. And still, nothing. Eventually, both mother and child die. One from the inside out, the other never having drawn a single breath. Puerperal fever. Childbed fever, they called it. The womb becomes an oven of infection, cooking her from within. The fever climbs. She shakes, hallucinates. Her body tries to burn out the poison, but the poison is already everywhere. In her blood, in her organs, in the tissue that will rot before she's even buried. Eclampsia, seizures. Her body convulses, no longer hers to control. She bites through her tongue. She stops breathing, and then she simply stops. These deaths were preventable, but no one knew how. No one even tried to learn. Where were the doctors? The doctors stood outside, not because they couldn't help, not because they didn't know there was death happening on the other side of that door, but because entering would be beneath them. Childbirth was women's work, shameful, polluting. The domain of midwives and mothers and blood-soaked reality that had no place in the libraries where physicians studied Galen and Hippocrates. Men who had written about women's bodies without ever touching one, without ever asking. So the doctors stood in doorways, listened to the screaming, took notes, perhaps, wrote theories about hysteria and wandering wombs and the weakness inherent in female flesh. They constructed entire philosophies of women's inferiority, based on anatomy they refused to witness, on suffering they would not deign to relieve. It wasn't ignorance. It was abandonment, a choice made over and over again, that women's deaths were not worth the compromise of male dignity. If you were wealthy, you could sometimes bribe a surgeon to intervene in emergencies. Sometimes. If he was desperate enough for money, or drunk enough to forget his pride. But if you were poor, if you were a peasant bleeding out in a barn, you had only the midwives, only the women who stayed. The men who could have saved you stood outside, protecting their reputations, while you drowned in your own blood. But the midwives, they never left. She is the only one who stays. The midwife, usually older, often widowed, sometimes illiterate, but her hands know things books never taught. They're rough, calloused, stained with rust-colored shadows that soap can't reach anymore. She's caught 100 babies, watched 50 women die, and still, she comes when called. She knows she'll be blamed if the mother doesn't survive. She always is. Not the absent doctors. Not the God they claim willed it. Her. The woman who stayed when everyone else turned away. She kneels beside the birthing bed with her pouch of herbs that might help, might not. Chamomile for the pain. Useless, really. But what else can she offer? Prayers whispered low enough that God might actually listen this time. And her hands, always her hands, pressing, guiding, trying to coax life out of a body that's forgotten how to yield without breaking. When a woman dies, the midwife carries her. Not her body, that gets buried, but her ghost, the weight of her name, the memory of her last words. They accumulate, dozens of them, hundreds, a procession of the dead following her from room to room, whispering, "You tried. It wasn't enough." She is both hero and victim, savior and scapegoat, and she's alone in that chamber, doing everything she can with nothing. But what exactly can she do? When the blood won't stop, when the baby won't turn, when every method the midwife knows has failed, the rituals begin. Holy relics pressed against swollen bellies, the bone of a saint, wrapped in cloth, placed over the womb like it could bargain with death. Prayers in Latin, words no one in the room understands, but maybe God does, maybe he's listening this time. The priest chants, the midwife echoes, The woman screams through both. Eagle stones, small rocks found in eagles' nests, believed to hold the bird's power of easy birth. They're tied around her thigh, pressing into flesh that's already too tender, already too broken. It does nothing. But it's something to hold on to when there's nothing else. Blessed girdles, strips of parchment inscribed with prayers to Saint Margaret, the patron of childbirth, who was swallowed by a dragon and cut her way out from inside. The symbolism isn't subtle, neither is the desperation. The girdle is wrapped around her belly, a talisman against the dragon growing in her womb. These weren't foolish. They were human. Sincere attempts to control what couldn't be controlled, to give meaning to suffering that had none. The birthing chamber becomes a church, an altar, a site of sacrifice where blood is offered and prayers are traded for lives. But the relics don't work. The prayers go unanswered. And when even God turns away, what's left? Some deaths took days. Imagine it. You've been in labor for 36 hours. The contractions come in waves that don't end, that crash over you and pull you under and never let you surface. The baby won't come, can't come. You feel it stuck inside you, trapped, pressing against bone that will not yield. Everyone in the room knows. The midwife's face says it. The silence between prayers says it. You are dying. And so is the child you'll never meet. Your body keeps trying, contracting, pushing, tearing itself apart in a war it cannot win. Exhaustion becomes delirium. Pain becomes a language you speak fluently now, the only language left. Hours blur into more hours. The candles burn down and are replaced. And still, nothing. There is a solution. Embryotomy, they call it. A word too clean for what it means. Dismembering the fetus inside the womb, piece by piece to save the mother's life. The midwife doesn't have the tools, doesn't have the knowledge. Sometimes a surgeon can be summoned, if you're wealthy, if there's time. But there's rarely time, and you're rarely wealthy. So the choice becomes no choice at all. You die. The baby dies. Both of you, together, locked in an embrace that becomes a grave. Was there any other way? They could cut you open. But only after you were already dead. Caesarean sections existed in the Middle Ages, but not to save mothers, to save souls. The blade came out when you stopped breathing, when your pulse faded, when it was clear you were lost. Then, and only then, the cut was made. Fast, desperate, not surgical, sacramental. The goal was never your survival. It was the infant's baptism. Get the baby out before it dies too. Splash holy water on its blue lips before the soul escapes unbaptized, condemned to limbo forever. That mattered. That was urgent. Your body cooling on the table? Irrelevant. You were already gone. The imagery is Gothic, macabre, the blade slicing through your belly as your blood stops flowing. The womb opened like a tomb. The priest reaching inside, pulling out a child that might live minutes or seconds, chanting Latin over its tiny, gasping mouth, saving its soul while your body lies ruined, discarded, no longer useful. This was the priority. Theology over biology, souls over survival. Your life was worth less than ecclesiastical compliance, less than the chance to mark another soul as saved before God's ledger closed. Why couldn't they save you instead? Why was the knife only for the dying, never for the living? Because they didn't know, and worse, they didn't try to learn. She survived the birth, held her baby, smiled even, Then 3 days later, she was dead. Childbed fever, puerperal infection, a killer no one could see, carried on the midwife's unwashed hands, on the physician's instruments, on the cloth used to wipe away blood. Bacteria, invisible, relentless, multiplying in the warm, torn tissue of the womb. The fever starts slowly, a slight warmth, nothing alarming. Then it climbs. Her body becomes a furnace. The womb, that sacred vessel of life, turns into an oven of rot. Infection spreads through her bloodstream like poison through water, reaching her organs, her brain. Delirium sets in. She speaks to people who aren't there. She doesn't recognize her own child. Then she dies. Not from the birth itself, but from the aftermath, from the help she received. The cruel mathematics. The more people touched her during delivery, the more likely she was to die afterward. Assistance became assassination. Care became contagion, and no one knew. They blamed bad air, evil spirits, her own moral weakness. They prayed harder, burned more herbs, and the invisible killer kept spreading from woman to woman, room to room, year to year. You could survive the battlefield of birth only to be murdered by ghosts in the days after. By demons no one could name, no one could fight, no one even believed existed. And the deaths kept compounding. What happens to the children left behind? The infant survives the birth but has no one to feed him. Wet nurses, if you can afford them. Goat's milk, if you're desperate. Or simply, nothing. Infant mortality was already catastrophic, but motherless babies died even faster, their small bodies surrendering to starvation or neglect within weeks. The father remarries within months. Not cruelty, necessity. Children need mothers to survive. The new wife steps into a kitchen still haunted by her predecessor, raises children who look at her with resentment or emptiness, inherits grief she didn't create but must carry anyway. This was normal, unremarkable. A society built on the corpses of mothers, where children grew up motherless so often that it barely warranted mention. Family trees full of gaps, ghosts where names should be, fathers on their third or fourth wife, children who never knew their mothers' faces, only the stories told by others, stories that grew vague and thin over time until they vanished entirely. Empty cradles, silent kitchens, a son who knows his mother died bringing him into the world and carries that guilt like a stone in his chest for the rest of his life. Collective trauma, normalized into mundane reality. This was simply how things were, how things had always been. But how did it shape them? How did women live, knowing this was waiting? Every bride knew. On her wedding night, 14 years old, maybe 15, she climbs into bed beside a man she barely knows and understands that this is the beginning of her end. Not metaphorically, literally. Consummation starts the countdown. Pregnancy is a death sentence she's expected to accept with grace, with piety, with a smile. The wedding bed is an altar. No. It's a coffin, lid still open, waiting. She prays. Of course she prays. To Saint Margaret, patron of childbirth, who survived the dragon. To the Virgin Mary, who somehow made it through without dying, a miracle so rare it required divine intervention. She prays she'll be one of the lucky ones, one of the 2 out of 3 who survive. But the prayer tastes like a lie, even as it leaves her lips. Some women resign themselves, acceptance as armor against terror. Others joke darkly with each other in kitchens and gardens, gallows humor that makes the inevitable feel almost bearable. And some, most maybe, carry a secret terror they can't voice, a knowledge that sits in their chest like a stone. I am going to die. Maybe not this year, maybe not the next, but eventually, my body will kill me. And there's nothing she can do. No choice, no escape. Marriage is compulsory. Pregnancy is inevitable. Death is patient. Did anyone try to stop this? Some midwives knew too much, and that made them dangerous. The woman who understood which herbs could stop bleeding. The one who knew how to turn a breech baby before it became a death sentence. The midwife whose patients survived more often than they should. She drew attention, suspicion, whispers. How does she do it? What dark knowledge does she possess? The better you were at saving women, the more dangerous you became. Competence looked like witchcraft. Knowledge looked like heresy. If you saved too many lives, you must have made a pact with something unholy. Because God, clearly, wanted women to suffer. So they dragged her before the church court, examined her herbs as evidence of sorcery, twisted her success into proof of demonic intervention. Her patient's survival became her condemnation. She saved women, so she must be punished. The Inquisition didn't burn every competent midwife, but it burned enough. Enough to send a message. Knowing how to heal was suspect. Challenging God's will, the convenient fiction that kept women dying, was unforgivable. Patriarchy and theology, hand in hand, conspiring to keep women ignorant, superstitious, and bleeding out on straw floors. Any woman who threatened that order, who dared to develop real knowledge, became a heretic. A witch. A problem to be solved with fire. And so the dying continued. Room after room, year after year. The screaming has stopped. That's how you know it's over. Not because she's resting, not because the baby finally came, but because she has nothing left. No breath for sound, no strength for struggle. The hemorrhage won't stop. Blood pools beneath her, dark and thick, soaking through everything it touches. Her pulse, already weak, already fading, flutters once, twice, then disappears. The midwife reaches forward with stained, trembling hands and closes the woman's eyes, a gesture of mercy she's performed too many times to count. In the corner, a newborn cries, if it survived. Sometimes it did. Most of the time, actually. The baby lived, and the mother didn't. A trade the world deemed acceptable. The husband is summoned. He arrives too late. He always does. He stands in the doorway, looking at what used to be his wife. And there's nothing in his face but exhaustion. Grief, maybe, but mostly exhaustion. Because this was always a possibility. Everyone knew. And now it's real. One more body, one more grave. One more statistic in a ledger no one was keeping. This is how it ended. Over and over, millions of times. No grand meaning, no divine purpose. Just death, quiet and mundane, swallowing another woman whole. What does this mean for us? These women are your ancestors. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. The women who died screaming in medieval birthing chambers are in your bloodline. Your family tree is built on their corpses. The ones who survived just long enough to pass on their genes before the next pregnancy killed them. Or the ones who died, leaving children who carried their blood forward into a future they would never see. Your existence is an accident of survival. A lottery won by women whose names you'll never know, whose faces were never painted, whose graves are unmarked or gone entirely. You are here because enough of them lived. Barely. Just long enough. Every bloodline is a river of the dead. Trace it back far enough and you'll find her. The woman who hemorrhaged on straw. The girl who seized and stopped breathing. The mother who survived 4 births and died on the 5th. They're in you. Their terror. Their resilience. Their silent, swallowed screams. And our anxieties around pregnancy. Our cultural fear of childbirth. Our instinctive dread when we see a positive test. That's inherited too. Genetic memory. Trauma encoded in our cells, passed down through centuries, whispering, "This could kill you." What do we owe them? These ghosts we carry? How do we honor women who died so we could exist? The answer waits in the silence after the question. Modern women still die in childbirth. Not 1 in 3. Not anymore. Medical progress saved millions. Antibiotics, cesarean sections performed on living mothers, blood transfusions, sterile technique, knowledge bought with centuries of corpses. We learned. Finally, slowly. Too late for the women who came before, but in time for some who came after. But not all. In hospitals today, women still hemorrhage, still seize, still die from complications that could be prevented if someone cared enough to intervene. Poor women. Women of color. Women in countries where medical care is a luxury, not a right. The medieval nightmare isn't over. It's just more selective about its victims now. The difference is, we know better. We have the knowledge, the tools, the ability to save almost every mother who walks into a delivery room. What we lack isn't medical understanding. It's will. Resources. The collective decision that women's lives matter enough to prioritize. The medieval women died because no one with power cared enough to save them. Their deaths were seen as inevitable, natural, God's will. We know differently now. So what's our excuse? These ghosts are watching. The women who bled out on straw, who screamed into silence, who died so we could live. They're asking, what will you do with the knowledge they never had? A single candle burns in the darkness. Will you let it go out?